Welcome again to the new Kevin Smith Great Witness Show. The New Adventure series is. I'm Dean Bell here with Ronald, and Kevin has some cool experiences to share with us so we can become more aware if we recognize what's going on here. And Dwayne just said in the last show that we were on, it's all about awareness, and awareness is like, it's a cool thing. It's just like when you're aware, you don't have to, everything falls into place. Everything makes sense if you go to your awareness. Always go to your awareness, not necessarily knowledge. That's part of it, but awareness is everything, because you're overall everything, because everything is awareness. Life is awareness. So you can't go wrong with that. It's a matter of how you recognize what you're aware of, and that's why we're listening to Kevin, because he explains it very well, articulates it well.
Isn't that just a part of knowing? You know, there's no question in your mind. There's no question. Yeah, there's no question in your mind at all.
I know what you mean, but then there's awareness, which is something beyond knowing. There is a fine distinction as I see it. Awareness is just beyond any idea like knowing or thinking. It's just an isness, and that's why I say it's a recognition. So if you think you know something, you think you know something. It's an idea, kind of. But an awareness is just is. It's an isness. There's no consideration about it. It just is.
I think you also got a consideration your experiences that you have that cement that thought, and you know for sure. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here. We'd be doing something else.
It's an aspect.
Yeah.
As we know, part of our ongoing real side assignments consist of approaching all who reside in this simulator from one dimensional end of it to the other, and presenting the true reality, the ears, the real guides, the new you song connection, the overall real purpose, that being to recognize the ears and stand as the true light beings we actually are. The simulator then, having served its purpose as the overall comparison to recognize the is from, to recognize what is real, this everything, true reality, by comparing it to what isn't, that which are simulated and encapsulated isolated ideas that can be experienced, that then are not this isness, everything reality. And so every individual consciousness is animated by this real awareness that's singular purpose is to recognize the isness that it is a part of, from the comparisons that the construction of the consciousness effects as a simulated experience. And the consciousness is comprised of these compounded ideas, as it has been continuously added to since we first entered the simulators, and especially from the moment where we began free will self-deciding with the personal self. Before free will is established, before the additional faculties of the literal mind become utilized, even though a consciousness is developed with the animal forms, the real awareness that animates the animal vehicles will do as the real awareness does. It just is. It remains in the nowness of its true reality. The animal body forms go through their projected lines, an almost automatic progression that builds upon itself, and according to the consciousness, the species that the embodiments progress through dictates behavior in relation to other animal species and forms. The reactions to situations rather automatic also according to the species, all based on the inclination of survival. But it's almost then programs of species consciousness that run of their own accord, and absent of the additional literal faculties, so the animals don't add anything to the experiences their consciousness programs produce. They simply deal with the situations as they take place, and when the situation is over, it is dismissed from any further consideration that, say, a human might engage in. The real awareness maintains direct connection with the body form, and as such, the animal is simply a vehicle, and the real awareness maintains its forever nowness of its true reality, state of being. A little like having a computer that is projecting on the screen the simulated game as according to the animal consciousness, but the computer game operator, the real awareness, is just the indifferent objective view of its created self and the experiences it goes through. But when free will is established, this is effectively afforded through the literal mental faculties of the body vehicles, and instead of maintaining this nowness real awareness position as these ideas are generated, the considerations, the convictions, etc., so these cause a removing from the real awareness nowness position, and anything that isn't the isness nowness of the real awareness is that which is simulated, the ideas of a creation, and this rather creates a separate self, a personal self, a separate awareness from the real awareness, but still overall the same awareness, as everything is awareness. But the personal awareness becomes lost in its own idea creations, and eventually forgets the real awareness that it is a part of and actually is. The personal awareness thinks it is its consciousness and the experiences that generate from it, as opposed to the consciousness just being a vehicle for experiencing in a creation. And so, rather than a real awareness objective to a creation position being the computer game operator, it's more that the personal awareness established is now absorbed into the game and thinks it is real, and indeed the creational position is now subjective rather than objective, and absent of the real awareness nowness connection and position, the personal awareness is in full absorption and agreement with its consciousness creation, and rather than simply being and making sense with life in every moment as the real awareness naturally would, the personal self goes spinning off into endless avenues and pursuits, ideas and creations, in addition to simply going through the body forms and the experiences that accompany them. And absent of the real awareness connection, much of the personal self's activities will be self-serving, very often destructive, and anything that isn't just this nowness, real awareness position will be then the illusions of the body vehicle ideas constantly generated and sat in, the thoughts, emotions, etc., that all add additional data to the consciousness, and any idea created and applied in addition to this nowness, real awareness state is a distortion, is a cause and effect, and so the consciousness becomes overburdened with these restricting, distorted ideas, and the overall consciousness, as it affects overall the simulator, so restriction and distortion overall must impact adversely on the simulator, which brings it through its degradation cycles. However, despite how convoluted with restricting ideas the consciousness has become, if we stand in the nowness of the real awareness, whatever the consciousness of ideas comprises of ceases generating and projecting its restriction into not only future lifetimes, but also as an overburdening impact into the simulator also. We no longer agree with the consciousness. We withdraw from its cause to effect restricting and simulator degrading impact, and utilize it more so in ways that make sense with life and are beneficial to all. Of course, it is a process. As we slowly face all of the consciousness and its construction, the bulk of it subconscious, then decide to extricate ourselves from attachment to all its ideas, but as we gradually do so, it eases off the burden on the simulator, like having every single file and web page on your computer screen simultaneously, which lags the computer, but then you begin to click off the files and pages one by one, all the ideas of the consciousness, until nothing is on your screen except the current simulated experience you are in, and you are in the nowness of your real awareness, the operator and objective view of your experience, and not immersed or attached to anything of it. And so, for every individual that steps up and goes through this process, so they ease off their consciousness impact on the simulator and offset the simulator implosion by fractions and degrees. And this does include everybody, the controllers, just as much as those they control, as all are precious in the impact they have on the simulator, and all are struggling to recognize the real awareness that they are, and then to recognize the ears as the real purpose for the simulators, and as the controller characters have the agreements through the overall consciousness that allows them to heavily and adversely affect the simulation as they do. If these dark force characters step up also, they doing so will have major ramifications on the lives of countless individuals in this creational realm. And as the controllers have the free will agreement permissions to their control, so can they mold and shape the consciousness of those they dominate, garner the agreements that they do, to bring about an overall simulated situation where they have the controlling positions they crave, but also to the detriment of their slaves and the environments and planets they are imprisoned on. And so these controllers, should they decide differently, they can have a huge impact on the overall consciousness. In the very least, release it from such controlling agreement ideas through the various means they do so, and as they have the ears of the world, so to speak, as they control all mainstream sources of information, it wouldn't take very long for human consciousness to be beneficially changed. Naturally, then, it's a constant to be attempting to approach such controlling individuals on the real side, and indeed many dark force characters are deciding to step up, and as I was saying, the higher up the hierarchy they are placed, the more must be their effect on the simulator situations overall. In this real side experience, it seems a group and myself were endeavouring to approach an individual who was set to become a future leader of a country of the world. My impression was that it would be more a Western country, and one where the country is more influential in the affairs of all others on a global scale. I did have the impression this man was set to be the President of America, so who knows how far into the future this may be, but it was a case of us trying to approach him now. The control systems are such that it would be rather the task to get anyone near the White House or any political position of influence who wasn't one of the dark forces. For anyone to even be in a position where they have effected for themselves circumstances where they have such an option must have been affiliated with the dark forces for lifetimes, or how else would your experience reflect a position in which you will be detrimentally impacting a slave species and maintaining the control of it, if being a controlling individual isn't your general inclination, intent, and the structuring of your consciousness? Nevertheless, despite the most heinous of individuals always finding themselves in positions where they can exercise to best effect their ill-intended proclivities, and indeed are placed in such positions as presidents, etc., as such characters would serve the controlling systems very effectively, even such individuals as these are deciding to become more aware, step up, and assist the guides and Dwayne. And in a case where an individual who was a dark force asset was deciding to do just this, and is also being possibly prepared for an influential key position in the political structure of Earth, so it makes sense to attempt to approach him or her on the real side. Naturally, the dark forces will learn of our approaching of such individuals also, as when it comes to those disconnected from their real awareness, we do need engage them on the personal simulated side, a simulated side that the controllers can access, can see, and can interject themselves into and attempt to interfere with. And naturally, anyone stepping up initially, as they still cling to the bulk of their consciousness and subconsciousness, with all the agreements to control it harbours, as it is a gradual letting go, so they are more vulnerable to attack, as their consciousness dictates that this can always be their potential experience, that the controllers can exercise their control over you as per the agreement ideas the consciousness comprises of. The more you release attachment to the consciousness, the less any agreement permissions are retained that allow adverse imposition from whatever source or individual the agreements are extended to, until, as you stand completely in the real awareness, having fully released the consciousness, then you become untouchable, as it is you that decides your simulation, and if there is no agreement with any simulated idea which translates as an individual's ability to harm you, then you become beyond anyone's ability to impose adversely upon you. They may certainly feature in your experience, as all consciousness generates and therefore shares the overall computer game stadium of the simulator, and they may attempt to attack you as per their decided consciousness. But if you haven't agreed that they can do so successfully, then they can't. Like computer game characters with their respective agreed to programmed skills in relation to each other. But anyway, stepping up this possible future president of America might be, but still very much the effect of a very distorted and ill-intended orientated consciousness, that he would, if he continues to become more aware, begin to extricate himself from. We are always the effects of our consciousness, our body forms, our life positions, and so our overall simulation is as dark and distorted as the consciousness dictates. And although we instantly are what we are now in reality, it takes the cause and effect moments it does, through decided time phases, to become so, from the personal, one-dimensional perspective. We are always somewhat behind of that which we are creating, like being late for one's own funeral. On the real side then, as everything is, as it is decided and agreed to now, so individuals will appear and be positioned as the instant effects of themselves, and we may see individuals in distorted body types and forms, and in unenviable positions in life accordingly. This was such a situation, for not only were we to engage this stepping up, possibly would-be president, but we had to do so rather on his own simulated turf, as it were, with agreements that facilitates our ability to do so. In this case, direct agreement with him, as he was extending this through his want to step up. And so we rather had to wade through what seemed to be a very dark and forbidding swamp, a rather nightmarish, gloomy overall setting that I would suggest was the lower astral, for again, this individual, although wanting to step up, was still rather the effects of what he had been deciding, and his positioning in life, the lower astral, then rather reflected this. Could we have just teleported into his presence? Yes, but then such simulated activities of traipsing through swamps and jungles do have the experience better recollected on waking. For anything intense, in any way alarming, does imprint on the personal self-mind better. And indeed, the group and I had to fend off all manner of creatures, monsters, lower astral-based dwellers, but not an issue for those that didn't harbour any agreements that can allow that such creatures can effect harm upon us, which indeed was the case here, and looming out of the mist and darkness now was a huge, medieval, Gothic-looking castle, where the future president-to-be resided. We were accosted by various guards at the castle boundaries. We dealt with them without issue. We entered the castle and wound our way eventually to a chamber where the individual we sought resided. He would express how he indeed wanted to step up, how he was tired of being a controller, how he had effected for himself the potentiality of becoming president, but that he wanted to take the opportunity to utilize his political position to benefit all life and assist the guides, though it may be questionable if he would now be able to get anywhere near the White House through such a turnaround in intent that rather would be at odds with that of the simulator controllers. But perhaps this is why his name and identity was not revealed to my personal self, as the dark forces watch the real side and can see so far, but it is possible to shroud from their sight certain details and aspects that I had the impression might be the case here, to protect this man's identity, that he might have the chance to claim an influential position in the controlling systems, but work on behalf of the guides. That yes, this castle had guards, but they seemed oblivious and not aware of what they were guarding, as was my impression. The only detail I recollected was that he was black, and he did convey great disappointment in how the first ever black president had conducted himself. But then I'm uncertain why he found that at all surprising, as Obama was a dark force, ill-intended reptilian controller through and through. But nevertheless, he had aspirations to be a black man of great significance and assistance, very much attached to his identity and body vehicle then, but he was rather just taking his first tentative steps beyond his personal self-consciousness, so hardly surprising. The scene faded, and we will see what comes of this. He may just as readily change his mind, as it surely is a risky business to buck the controlling systems he had been involved with for the longest time. But if he doesn't take the risk, he stays with the consciousness and goes into the darkness with all others that decide to cling to a creation as the simulator continues its decline. Further scenes followed, and it seems I was continuing on with the general idea of gathering agreement on the real side from all beings where possible. I shared once a real side experience where I had an encounter with a race of spider beings of various sizes, from tarantula size to those as big as houses, and how they were accepting and agreeable, and I would have an audience with their royal representatives. For despite their body forms, what inhabited them was personal, free will, self-deciding awareness, and not animal forms directly connected with the real awareness before the personal self is established. This was a similar situation, as I was granted an audience with a kind of spider. It was approximately the size of a baseball, spider-like, though with the features and details of the body type that was hard to define. A sentient being, another free will, self-deciding personal awareness, seeking to step up and reconnect with its real awareness, etc. The spider being was a female, and presented like a kind of a queen. In actuality, it was some very highly placed, demonic, or entity creature of some type, as were my impressions, that had up until now been gathering vast quantities of individuals as agreeable real side slaves. Every body form of slave you might imagine, humans, aliens, whoever extended agreement to be so enslaved. This spider being resided in a kind of gloomy, forbidding area. I suggest again the lower astral. Everything was covered in strands and layers of her webbing, and her slaves generally wandered about aimlessly and bewildered amongst it all. It's very likely these other individuals had inadvertently extended agreements to this particular demonic entity, through where they had placed their focus, attention. What they may have indulged in making an unrealized connection and agreement with the lower astral that enabled this particular demon to take advantage of and enslave then these individuals. Just as heavy metal music, alcohol, drugs, etc. can have individuals aligned with the lower astral and the sort of beings that reside there, and then increase the possibility of such things as possession or infringement of the lower astral dwelling beings into their physical level experience, and the individuals in question generally are oblivious of what are in fact agreements they are extending that this can be so. And it was the case here that these slaves may not realize from their physical positions this was so, but in actuality this was their situation, positioned in the lower astral and in the control of this spider queen. For again, the effects are instantly so on the real side, but will not be so from the personal perspective until the simulated physical lifetime has rolled out and concluded. Then on transition they may be in for a surprise, or perhaps may walk into elements of such agreement effects on the physical also, in whatever ways these present as. But as I said, this spider demon queen was wanting to step up also, and I determined her to be sincere through my real awareness impressions. And as I spoke with her, she rather sat on my shoulder as we walked around her established lower astral kingdom, and as she also agreed to release her slaves from bondage. They all seemed to be snapping out of their trance-like states and looking around themselves, somewhat bewildered. And as I said, she seemed a very powerful being, creationally wise, certainly very capable and able to enslave others as she had, but now she was in agreement to become more aware, release her slaves, and assist the guides in whatever way she might. And perhaps others of her demonic entity kind will do likewise, as this creational wake-up is surely taking place throughout all dimensions of it, from the lower astral to the ethereal. I also had a brief scene where I was in a classroom, and I have found that the classroom very often represents literalism, the personal self. And if I sit in the classroom and just go through whatever's taking place there, then nothing other than the classroom scene will transpire. But always there is an individual in these classroom scenes that, although in the form of someone I know or had known from the physical this lifetime around, is in fact a real guide, as my impressions reveal. It seems that the classroom represents my sitting in personal self ideas on the real side, and that to have what would be a more beneficial with life situation or awareness bolstering experience demands I recognize the illusions of my personal self I am encasing myself within, then do something that would break the routine and rollout of the classroom scene, with the guide, in whoever's form he is in, present and waiting for me to do so. And so I stood up and tossed my papers around. This was rather an action that broke my personal self illusionary immersion, like going off script in a movie, doing something different that a routine consciousness would not have, being random and instantaneous, and the guide, in this case, in the form of a friend I once knew, and a form that occasionally the guides will take, that being an individual I once knew from school, called Keith. The guide encouraged me on, and would stand with me. The scene would fade as I stepped from its personal self-idea generated illusion. Curiously, I was in the presence briefly of a kind of large camel-like creature, and although very much appearing as an animal form, it seemed remarkably aware, and so perhaps a case of a real awareness being-to-being interaction with it, aside from the body forms. It spoke of a great many things, and unfortunately much of which I was unable to bring back to the physical on waking, but I remember it speaking of the dinosaur body forms its awareness once had inhabited. Of all the things to recall, the scene switched again, and I found myself observing a kind of metallic enclosure that's purpose was overall as a kind of containment facility and a torture chamber. Although I saw no individuals, my impressions were of this place being full of imprisoned beings, those that were typical of the vast majority in the simulator at this time, that of being enslaved, having agreements through the consciousness that always can potentially facilitate adverse imposition from their controllers, which in this case expressed as these particular individuals having been kidnapped and imprisoned here on the real side, in this metallic prison, and constantly suffering torture and abuse. For again, the control and imposition is a constant throughout the dimensions of creation. If you agree to the control of others over you, and they are of an ill-intended persuasion, then you will constantly experience unfavourable situations in all the forms they may take: intimidation, abuse, torture, as is the sensation and thrill of such controlling characters. In this case, I would observe only the plight of one individual, who seemed to be encased under the ground. There was a kind of a torturer, who on activating certain levers and controls would inflict harm upon the one so imprisoned, as these metallic beams would descend into the ground as the controls were activated, and presumably apply a crushing pressure to the one under the ground in some form or other. The torturer manning the controls would do so at the bidding of a woman who seemed to have the keeping and control of this facility, and although I never saw her or the unfortunate wretch who was tortured, I would only see the torturer, the operator. I would hear her voice booming out across this prison. The individual suffering the torture, although at the mercy of his predicament, as in accordance with his agreements through his consciousness, did seem high-spirited and forever screaming out obscenities and derogatory remarks directed to the woman in charge. The fact that I didn't in any way interject may suggest agreement wasn't extended that I could do so, and so the experience for the one tortured and all others contained here would be maintained, as we always experience what we decide, including rescue possibilities. It's all about agreement. So a curious scene, which soon faded also, again indicating that this creational realm certainly isn't a safe place to reside in, regardless of how we attempt to make it our la-la land, for with the consciousness generally as it is programmed with agreements to control, so can such situations as I just described become anyone's experience on the real side and the physical. And a final scene where I suddenly would be afforded the view of inside one of the spaceships of a huge reptilian fleet. My impressions were that these were more the stepping up, becoming more aware, making sense with life, and supporting the real guide's variety of reptilian, rather than the controlling destructive types. I'm uncertain where their fleet was headed, but my view was more an immersion through the consciousness of one of the reptilians, as opposed to just a real awareness aside from simulation view. And as you have such full immersion experiences, as you step into the personal self of another, you experience not only their consciousness, but the extent of their connection or not to their real awareness. And if the individual's connection is lacking, then during such immersion views, you will experience this also, and at the time of the experience, you will think that whatever consciousness you have stepped into is you. It's like the real awareness that is this one overall awareness, seeing through the vehicle, the consciousness of one of the individualized, personal created selves, that all then are animated from the same overall awareness source, and according to the consciousness vehicle dictates the experience in regards to how personal self-immersed the consciousness is or not. The difference between thinking you are the consciousness, thinking you are your created simulation, or experiencing it and recognizing yourself as the real awareness that animates through it, and with such immersion views through the personal self of another, you feel what they do, rather than just watch the actors in the scene, and so cannot fully appreciate the emotions and ideas they are generating in response to their situations. Seemed these reptilians and their fleet had been rather attacked by some indefinable foe that presented as a kind of a fluid technology that infested their fleet. So very possibly some ill-intended expression of a being that was controller motivated or encouraged to launch an attack on what would be reptilians that were stepping up with the guides, as the controllers are always apt to do with anyone that threatens their control. These reptilians were, as most reptilians are, masterful shapeshifters, and it's as though, for every form this technology invading their ships took, and it assumed all manner of forms that, as I said, were hard to describe, seems these reptilians would alter their own forms in such a way that could deal with it. It was all rather difficult to describe. It seemed the reptilians themselves were part mechanical, at least internally, that their forms could become, at any moment of their choosing, mechanically enhanced. The manifesting of instant external epidermis armor or weaponry that suddenly sprouted from their scaled bodies. It was all rather bizarre. With full immersion through the consciousness of one of these reptilians, at the time everything made perfect sense, visually, etc. But on returning to the physical, and removing myself from one of their reptilian consciousnesses, then would it fall on me to put it together based on my personal self-references that I had to draw upon. But ultimately, the technological attack was defeated. The reptilians were victorious, and they proceeded on with their space fleet, wherever they were headed, perhaps on course to the planet Earth, as many aliens and their craft and respective fleets seem to be flocking to Earth and that area of creation at this time, the Earth being the central point and focus in creation that it seems to be, with Dwayne and the new presentation operating as it does from it. These curious, mechanical, infused reptilians, though the mechanics seemingly internal, were a little like the Wolverine character from X-Men in that regard, in that, on the surface, they seemed as normal reptilians, walking bipedal lizard body types, but then metallic material could suddenly emerge through their scales and enhance them in various ways, afford them additional protection, etc. And also I would see a feature of their decided customs. As it seemed, for these reptilians, it was the agreed upon idea to always assume new colorations and patterns to their skin scales, on a day-by-day basis. Whatever the design and colour was decided by presumably their leaders, and all then would flock to a certain technological device each day, press their hands to it. It would in some way read their genetic profile and technologically be able to make an instant alteration to their genetic templates that translated instantly through as an alteration in the patterns and colours of their scaled skin. For if you change the base frequencies of that which is the template for your body form, so must the body form change. Although masterful shapeshifters, this seemed to be something they did, and that they utilized technology for, a kind of a quaint custom. Technology that could potentially alter body form in any way imaginable. Just a case, as I said, of altering the base specific genetic code frequencies for it to be effected through to the holographic simulated body vehicle.
Okay, well, I'll start here. So we start with comparisons as a way of seeing through this matrix. We need to see what is not compared to what is, and that seems to be the way to do it, through comparisons. It seems odd maybe to some people, but that's the process we go through, just to see what isn't real compared to what is real. That in itself is a huge process and journey to begin. And being indifferent to the experiences that we create, or the personal self creates, that's important, because we have to learn how to separate who we really are to what we have created for ourselves as the personal self and our experiences that we've created. And that too is difficult and a challenge for people. And even the idea is it's foreign to a lot of people that something like that even exists. We do get lost in our own creations. They're very seductive. Creation is very seductive. So it's a matter of separating ourselves, our real self, to what, from what we created to who we really are, which is basically a viewpoint. Like you say, we get absorbed in the game, and the personal self is pretty much self-absorbing, self-preservation. It's like wants what it wants, and it has free will, which is interesting, because when we're in our real awareness, we don't really have free will, which sounds like, what do you mean we don't have free will? Well, once you use your will or have free will, then you pop back into creation, basically, and that's where free will exists. Otherwise, you're just an isness, and you just do what you do, see what you see, and you don't need free will. You don't need anything like that. It's like a mechanical thing or process we have, free will. Everything already exists, so you don't need will, or you just see it, basically. You don't need free will, or you don't need to create, you don't need to decide in a way, because it already is. So once you're in this real awareness of yourself, everything's available. So anything beyond that, it's an isness or beingness. Anything beyond that, then you pop back into creation, That's, again, it's okay, because you can use creation to see and help you relate to this isness that just is. Just native media, we talked about the media. Oh yeah, I was thinking, what if we outlawed all the media we have now, and all people had was nature shows, how to grow a garden, views of the ocean and animals, and I mean, pretty soon people would like, within a matter of a couple of weeks, probably people would forget about COVID or whatever's going on, the funny business, and just like start heading toward, putting attention on the environment, because that's what all they see in the media. I mean, just imagine that people would just, because the media has such a great influence on us, but if that's all they saw, it was like the good stuff, nature stuff, then that's where their attention would be, and they'd start making sense of things. Maybe, but that's just an idea. Because the media does play a huge, huge part in how people see things. And then you met the president, okay, or yeah, this black guy. We'll see where that goes. Because like you say, he has free will, so no matter what he decides now, things could change. And you see the the aliens too, there's good ones that have turned. It's always a matter of choice, moment by moment. Saw the Spider Queen. Oh, the swamp. You met the president in the swamp. Well, that reminds me of Trump and, clearing the swamp. They had that term, so he was still in the swamp, basically. So he's there to clean it up, maybe. We'll see. I just think you're just like the Oracle person. You just have all these, and you're up to date and everything. And so it's so cool to listen to you and what you go through there, Kevin. So thank you very much for all you do. Ronald, you have anything to share, comment?
I wanted to ask Kevin, when he talks about the lower astral, can he give me a little better definition of where that might be? Is that the what would be the higher astral? If there's a lower, there must be a higher astral.
Yeah, the astral level overall stems from the astral vehicle, which would be our second body, and the astral, a little like the physical level. Just as the physical level has nice areas and nasty areas, so is the astral similarly designed. And like as everything is, your position in life is always affected from what you decide and your consciousness. And so, as it is on the physical, if you have made very poor life choices or certain life choices, you may find yourself then placed in certain physical level circumstances. And as it is on the astral, will be the same situation, in that for those who are the most abrasive, those who make the least sense with life, those who impose and are restricting on others, so will they find themselves placed in the more lower astral regions, and in such a place you would expect to find, I mean, all the reptilians tend to lurk there, as you can imagine. All the vampires, all the vampires, werewolves, entities, demons. I mean, everything nightmarish you will expect to find there. And the higher astral is more described as, even though it would still be reptilian owned and controlled as everything in the simulator and all the life levels are, it would still be what would be described as the heavens of man, which are really the designated heavens, but nevertheless they would be what would be construed as the nicer parts of the astral level. And where the astral actually is, well, like everything in the simulator, like everything in creation, is here and now. And where you are in your awareness is simply what vehicle you are viewing from, and which filters are in place that prevents you from being able to perceive that area. So obviously, while we're where everything at the moment now, our awareness is currently locked into our consciousness, which then must decode through to the physical level. So the physical level is what we see, and then when we sleep, which is basically our awareness of vacating the consciousness, we are now at liberty to move our consciousness into any potential vehicle idea throughout all the dimensions and positions in creation. So potentially when we sleep, when we exit the consciousness, we can then see any part of the simulation. But of course, with most people, if they are very much resigned and attached to their consciousness, they very much take their consciousness with them, and so they sit in equally as limited positions on the real side. But for most people, then what their intent is, what they are deciding now, and their life choices is what they are now. But it takes rather a little bit of cause and effect time to be so, as it pertains to physical level positioning. But for individuals who are very abrasive now, their body forms and positions in life, they are already standing in. They just don't realise it yet. And like I've said in some experiences on transition, they might be in for a bit of a surprise, like these characters who are choosing very abrasively. So they are now positioned in the lower astral. And when they exit the physical level overlap, they will instantly be in that position in life amongst all the werewolves, vampires, weirdos, and entities and demonic.
Oh, sweeties, huh? Okay, now my next question is on the reptilians that are coming here. Do you think it's a lot of them have changed of thought since the queen was put into purgatory?
Yeah, a lot of the reptilians are stepping up now, particularly as what was their sort of their royalty, I suppose, the Orion Queen and such, was displaced and put in the Phantom Zone. So they are at more liberty to be able to exercise their free will and make decisions that make more sense with life. Whereas before, because the species is telepathic, it's a case of you can't secretly be becoming more aware and hope that your species don't realize you're doing so. So with a telepathic species, what you're thinking and doing will be instantly known by the rest of your species. And with the species as it is, the reptilians are very aggressive and brutish. Any of the individuals who would do anything against the dictates of the Queen would be instantly executed. And so that was very much that which deterred a lot of reptilians from even considering the idea of stepping up. But as you say, since the Queen has been displaced, so they are more willing to do so. Although there are still a lot of them who are maintaining and clinging on to their controlling inclinations. But yeah, throughout creation at the moment, more than any time throughout this simulator's history, are beings of all types and descriptions stepping up, like I described in that experience, everything from entities and spider queens all the way through to vampires and reptilians and every species in between. So it's a massive wake up on a huge scale, never before seen. And of course, as every individual begins to wake up, so agreement begins to swing in more beneficial to life directions. And as I've said on previous experiences as well, you start to remove your awareness and agreement from a consciousness of restriction. So it then removes the impact it has adversely on the simulator, which will also help to offset its demise by fractions and degrees.
Okay, the next question. Andrew Bisario said that when he met Obama's mother, she told him that he possibly might be a president too. When Bush and Obama and Clinton met, I think this was in the late 1970s, they were all told they would be presidents. That's when they were going through this time travel stuff. So when you said that the fellow is colored, I sort of wonder. So I don't know. I'm trying to think who in the heck that would be now, but I don't know who. Anybody got any idea who it might be? Just guessing.
It may not necessarily be a president that's yet to come, because a lot of the stuff that we also do, and Dwayne has described some of the experiences in his books as well, is that he would go back to other time phases, to other dimensions, and meet the individuals lifetimes before they aspire to certain positions, in an attempt that he can perhaps impact on them in such a way that will have them making better decisions later on down the timeline, which will then translate into our present dimensional situation, in which situations can then possibly be changed. Because I think Dwayne actually approached a lot of people who are in political positions of influence now, but back in previous time phases, in an effort to try and get them to possibly change their direction. And so it's very possible this may not be a president yet to come, but maybe an individual who is in the political scene now that I'm approaching at a point or even a lifetime well before he actually aspired to such a position. And although I don't, and he may not necessarily have then become the president, but perhaps he does indeed hold some sort of office or position of political influence within the political systems. So that may also be a possibility, because I had no indication that it was necessarily of what sort of time this meeting with this individual was. So it could have been any dimensional position really, but for the same overall purpose, to try and have the individual perhaps change their mind of what their choices they were making. Whereas in his case, I mean, he actually wanted to step up, and he was extending his want to do so. And so, as the agreement dictated, we were able to enter his experience and to facilitate his to assist him in that endeavor. And so maybe I'll see more of this experience at a later time, because we don't always get shown the entirety of it in one night. Many times I'll have an experience, then like maybe even years later I'll have the next part of it, and sometimes the next part of it may actually be the bit that precluded the experience that I saw earlier. So it just depends.
You have another experience, Kevin?
In this real side experience, I would find myself in the company of a fair-sized group of becoming more aware individuals, as was my impression, although none of the group my personal self could identify. But as I have said before, very often identities are only made apparent if this detail is required. The fact that the identities were not revealed suggests that these being aware individuals is all that was really needed to be known. We were all sat in a kind of a conference area, where you might imagine council meetings to be held, and sat before us would be Dwayne. He would be speaking with us regarding the real references that pertain to the ears, giving us all a very inspiring pep talk, for often the personal self does need a little bolstering, a little encouragement, as it is quite the endurance journey through a creation. And I would say Dwayne was taking the time on the real side to do just this. I mentioned how we only have revealed to us the identities of those that we need be aware of, and so this would be the case here, not just that I would recognize Dwayne as he had assumed his physical level form for this real side meeting, but as I turned around and looked behind me, I would see a row of seats right at the back of this gathering of individuals. Sat there would be 3 individuals that I did recognize. 3 individuals that were part of the new presentation, but at a certain point had stepped back into their personal selves. Everyone here was aware of them also, including Dwayne. It seemed very much as though they were invited to participate. It would be their choice if they indeed did so, and here they were. There were a few sneers and derogatory comments made, directed at these three, from the group, but Dwayne would remind the group that everyone is in creation to wake up to the recognition of the ears and the beings of real light awareness that they are. Everyone is struggling through creation, regardless of if they recognize their real intent and purpose, if they are completely unconscious to it at this stage, or if they had begun the process of awareness, but for whatever personal self reasons had stepped back. But always is the door open for people to decide to try again, and yes, they would have to earn their way and prove themselves to life and regain trust with the guides. But life looks on indifferently to the personal choices we make. It can only reveal itself to us as we step up to it in equal measure through our real intent and our sharing of the true reality. And if we don't, then life and the guides just let us be. These three individuals looked rather ashamed of themselves, as suggested through their body language, slumped in their chairs, their heads hung low, but my impression was they had accepted Dwayne's offer to listen in on this awareness meeting on the real side, and that it seemed all three do want to take up their awareness process again and assist Dwayne and the guides. Since these three had stepped back into their personal selves, for the times since that I had seen them on the real side, they always have presented as disruptive, occasionally listening in on situations, but generally being influenced to cause disruption. But always their efforts prove rather futile, and they only are digging themselves in deeper with what they are deciding, and especially when interfering with Dwayne and the galactic activities, so they are incurring severe cause and effect consequences for doing so. So this was the first time I've seen all three together on the real side since they stepped back into their personal selves, absent of funny attitudes, agendas, and disruptive intent, that they were indeed willing to listen and step up once more. And it's possible then we may see all three re-establish themselves on the physical, if they can get through their personal self-attitudes, and especially the created emotions of shame and guilt they evidently were immersing themselves in. A little later, Dwayne would speak to me directly, and he would be giving me dietary advice, in fact. Very often, the guides will suggest to us that which we need adopt health-wise to assist physical body maintenance. Dwayne has often said how he has real side experiences where certain food types, fruits and vegetables, are made apparent as to something he ought include in his diet. And to be honest, my diet and health are not the greatest, and here Dwayne would suggest almonds as something I ought to consider, but to ensure they are soaked first in water, as absent of doing so, the almonds are very acidic, and only when immersed in water for a time do they become more alkaline, as processes within the almond have it preparing to sprout, as an almond would if encountering water in nature. Dwayne the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Ava had a couple of experiences recently with one of the individuals of the three wanting to return. The other two, that's something else. They're somewhat in their own heads, but they were invited back. Everybody, the whole world, the whole of creation is invited, of course, but most people will scoff and laugh at us, etc., which is fine too. We're here for everyone, but at the same time they have to be sensible, that's all. So we will see what happens in regards to this. We're giving these people a chance, but we're not babysitters. There's an opening there, like the bus that's leaving, but if you don't get on it, you'll have to wait for the next bus or start running fast. It's your choice, and I know it's hard for everybody, but as we keep putting things out there in the world, of course these people will return, and they feel reluctant, guilty, ashamed, strange, etc. They don't know what to say, etc. So lots of times they won't step up again. So yes, they have to be a risk taker. They have to just step up and face it, and when they do, it's all okay. Just step up and face it. No funny stuff. Just be real, like the sun shining. Let's be real here. The witnesses are very important. They're like the alternative viewpoints of what I'm presenting here. I could sit here and tell my experiences, but then it becomes all me, and that's not the idea. It's everyone. It's all life. I put all life before me, and as each person steps up, we do whatever we can. But they have to be realistic too. They have to do something, because again, this is not a little pony ride like you had when you were a youngster. You really have to step up and be real. It just depends upon how real you want to be, and that's the best part, when you can really surpass your personal self altogether. You can be real with no restrictions, where you don't have like this little puppy dog yanking on your pants, which is the little self. It isn't necessary. And that experience I had, I think it was about June of this year. So in case you're wondering when I had these encounter with these three individuals.
Yeah, and since then, Ava and Dwayne both had experiences, other experiences with them, and one of the individuals, they did step up, and at least on the real side, wanting to come back. The other two haven't heard from, but one of them, yes, they want to do something for themselves and others. So this is ongoing, and it's cool that to see these people on the real side and check in with them once in a while, because some of them will come back because there's nowhere else to go, basically. And they see that, same with the reptilians and the ones that are doing evil deeds, you could say. There's nowhere else to go. So they see that and they want to come back. And it's never been like this a time in creation where there's so much potential for everybody if they only take the risk to do something, take the step, do something out of their comfort zone, and they'll see how it works. It's never what you think it is.
Oh, I wanted to add one more thing when you talk about the almonds. He's correct. You got to soak them. There's a chemical in the almonds that bind up your minerals. And so does this also cashews and Brazil nuts. And the worst one of all is soy. And wheat products have got that same chemical that binds the minerals in your body. Yeah, that's a biggie. Thought I'd just add it in. Thank you.
Because you're down in the almond center, down the valley where the almonds grow, right, Ron?
Right. We're right in the middle of it. Yeah. Millions of acres. Yeah, I used to work on one for a while.
Well, Kevin, great. It's a lot. You do a lot. Thank you so much for your bringing back the information. That's so cool. Everybody benefits from that. Well, we end it with a new you, which is your connection to something real. Try it. You might like it. New you. Ron?
New you. New you. Thought I'd try that.
Yeah, come to the Sunday 10 o'clock, the New You sing along. You can do what you sing New You to any tune you want. Kevin.
New you.